A strange apparition that haunts my house. A disembodied voice that confirms the presence of an energy. Hi friends, welcome to a new episode of the Chronicles of the Unexplained podcast. In today's episode, I'm gonna tell you what happened to my husband and I in the previous house where we lived in Liberty Hill, Texas. It's a suburb that is about 30 miles northwest of Austin. It turns out that during an ordinary day, he was on his laptop checking some of the security cameras we had, because there was a camera in particular that always was running out of battery, comparing with the rest of the cameras. Chris, my husband, was always on the lookout for the whole security system to work, and he thought that the camera was always with low battery because there was, let's say, a lot of activity, since the house was located on the corner. Our street ended where there was a long corridor, parallel to the avenue. There were no houses in the front, since behind that corridor there were only trees, and behind those trees there was the railroad. On that corridor you could run or walk just to feel like you were in the middle of the field surrounded by trees. Then a lot of people pass through our street to go to that corridor to walk their dogs or their children in strollers or on bicycles. My husband was trying to figure out what the fault might be, because he had already modified the sensitivity of the camera several times, and he had also modified the range. In other words, any movement such as people walking on the sidewalk wouldn't be detected by the camera, only if they crossed a certain area, such as approaching the window or fence. In that way, the battery wouldn't be drained so fast. But we still had a problem. Earlier, he had swapped the batteries of the other cameras to see if there was probably something wrong. He also swapped cameras, and even though he had already tried several options, the camera in that corner always had low battery. Something important to mention is that my husband is an expert, since he works as a system engineer in a company where they install commercial security systems. He knows both physical installation and programming. Another important thing is that in that corner we had a tree, an oak, and it could be seen very well from a window that had been between the living room and the kitchen. The day of the weird apparition, my husband was checking that camera and he told me, "Look," showing me on the laptop, "I'm going to have to modify the range here and leave the tree out, because birds flew or passed by and any movement caused the camera to activate. This is already the last resort." And when he's showing me that on his laptop, I was in the kitchen. I could see the computer from the side. Then I see something white next to the tree, but I thought it was the brightness of the screen. I moved to the living room where my husband was sitting by the window. I go and stand in front of the laptop, and I still see clearly next to the tree a white figure, similar to the typical drawing of a ghost. It was clearly visible on the computer. The first thing I thought was that it had been windy and that some white cloth or plastic had flown and got stuck in the tree. So I tell my husband, "What is that?" And he tells me, "I don't know." And we both looked out the window and we couldn't see anything. He was grabbing his laptop, looking out the window, and at the same time at the screen of his laptop, and the white silhouette could be seen only on the screen. It was as if someone had put a white sheet covering the whole body and was standing right next to the tree. I asked Chris, "Are you seeing the same thing as me?" And he tells me, "Yes, that is weird." The camera showed in real time what was happening outside. You could see how the leaves of the tree moved slightly because it was a bit windy. And we stared at the image that we couldn't explain what it was, and it was only on the computer screen. Then the two of us, already intrigued, said, "Oh, the image must have frozen." Then my husband grabs the laptop and refreshes the screen, and the image comes back, but the thing was still there, and the camera was still in real time. But when we looked out the window again, there was nothing. It was clear that there was absolutely nothing next to the tree. It was about 7 o'clock at night. There was still light. It was summer, a hot day. Well, here in Texas, most of the time is hot. But I mean with that, there was enough daylight to see clearly through the window that it was not a reflection of any spotlight. I decided to go and see what exactly is next to the tree. And I tell my husband, "Don't move or move anything to the computer. And you tell me what you see when I'm outside." Again, I swore that the wind had blown a rag or a piece of white plastic and it had gotten stuck. But when I went out to see, there was nothing. So even when I was outside, I saw my husband's face through the window as if to say to me, "I don't know what happened," because he didn't see anything. That thing disappeared from the camera. I go into the house and ask him what had happened, and he tells me that, as if by magic, as soon as I left, the image refreshed and disappeared from the camera without him having moved anything. We were surprised at what happened. However, we didn't give it much thought about. Time passed. Then, on one of the occasions that we were talking about this with my family, my youngest son and one of my nieces, when they heard what happened to my husband and me, they turned to look at each other and said, "Oh, do you remember what happened to us?" So I asked them what happened to them. And they tell me that they were both alone in broad daylight, and that while they were both next to each other playing on their phones, Danny asked my niece something and says that a man's voice answered. The voice said, yes, you need to do it." So the two of them turned to look at each other with an expression of surprise, because both had heard the same voice answering what Danny had asked. They say that they were frightened because the voice that was heard was a very clear and very close man's voice, as if someone was there next to both of them. They tried not to make a big deal of it. But during the same day, a second time my son heard the same voice from the same man he had heard before. He says he made a comment to my niece, but he says she had her headphones on and she didn't hear him, nor did she hear what the man's voice said. Danny didn't want to say anything to her as not to scare her more, because he says that the truth is that they were a bit afraid, because they heard the voice very clearly and obviously only the two of them were there, nobody else. So my son decided not to be able to pay any more attention to that. He put on his headphones and tried to forget the incident. He says that he never heard anything again. I believe that what was around outside our house was not bad at all. I was many times outside at night next to that tree, watering the grass or watering the tree, and I never felt afraid. On the contrary, that house was our first home and had good vibes. No one else lived there before. We chose the lot and the house was built for us. I have a theory about that camera always running out of battery no matter what, because maybe there was a good energy that observed us from outside the house. Remember, friends, that this podcast is about unexplained situations. I don't try to convince you of anything. You have the last word. Make a judgment by yourself. If you like the episode, please share it with someone you know loves paranormal or unexplained stories. Follow me on different podcast platforms to receive notifications whenever a new episode comes out. Follow me on social media where I share previews of new episodes before they are published. Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as unexplained.enigma. Facebook, Chronicles of the Unexplained. Thanks for listening and see you all in the next unexplained story.